Thank you so much, Kathleen. Good morning, and I think good morning, good afternoon for anybody that's in a later time zone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Dali Sangera, and I lead Accenture's Sustainable Leadership and Organization Practice within growth markets, which covers Asia, Middle East, and the Africa regions, including Japan, China, Southeast Asia, Australia. And I'm pleased to say that over the last 3 years, Accenture has been the trusted partner for the United Nations Global Compact program in running this initiative. And I'm absolutely delighted to be able to facilitate this session, as the topic today is very, very important to me, both from a professional and from a personal perspective. I was born on a farm in a remote village in India, and by the time I came to the UK at the age of 7 or 8, I'd left behind a very sustainable way of living on a kind of very rural background, and then coming into a environment in the UK, and the whole ideas of minorities and diversity, equity and inclusion was something I experienced firsthand. And therefore, personally, this topic is very, very important to me across all the SDG goals. And I'm delighted to be able to share some of our findings with you today. And now over to you, Caroline, for you to introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Caroline here. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. So I'm a manager in our talent and organization practice at Accenture in Singapore, focusing more on the sustainable leadership and organization topic that we'll be sharing today across 4 countries of Southeast Asia. But I actually started my career as a consultant in international climate policy and renewable energy back in Europe, where I was working with development banks and ministries of developing countries, as well as international institutions on broader climate discussions. So it's a topic that is also quite dear to my heart.
Thank you, Kathleen. So what we want to basically just start off with is to actually set the objective for this session. After this session, we're hoping that you will have developed a good understanding of the overall drivers that shape a sustainable organization, and have a better understanding of the core focus areas and the 4 key ingredients which are very much at the heart of creating a sustainable organization. And also looking at not just the what, but also the how. So how can organizations actually implement some of these changes in their own organization, from a midterm to a long term, as well as some immediate actions that can be taken to take you towards building a sustainable organization. We hope that you'll be able to then convey a very tangible benefits that come from having a sustainable organization being created, and also be able to adopt more of a holistic approach to how sustainability actually gets embedded within every element of the organization. As well as equipping your leadership with tools and looking at how do you engage all the different stakeholders that an organization has to interact with. And we will be able to provide you with some key frameworks for how you look at the people within your organization, so that the workforce itself is able to be more innovative and be able to create a culture which is sustainable in itself. So that's the objective, and I'm going to move on to the agenda. It's a packed agenda today. We will have opportunities for people to engage, and it's important that we can engage with each other through the Q&A and the chat window as well. So I do encourage you all to please use that. We'll also have some Mentimeter scores, so we do need you to have the laptop or the phone ready to be able to take part in those as well. So in terms of the agenda, we're going to move next. We're going to cover things like emerging the sustainability theme. So what are these and why are these important? What are the key ingredients, as I mentioned, to creating that organizational sustainability agenda? And then what are the specific actions? And that's the bulk of the meeting. We're going to have the 45 minutes around the 4 key principles, the people agenda, the transparency and communication, and the innovation and collaboration that's required to actually build a sustainable organization. And we'll have a chance again for Q&A at the end as well. So looking forward to your engagement here. Okay, so before we dig a bit deeper into it, we wanted to share with you some of the emerging sustainability trends. So Caroline, please, we can just go through all of them. At a high level, people can look at sustainability and say, it's all the rage at the moment. It's just a big trend. However, what we're seeing actually is that it's more than just a trend. It's actually something that's become a business imperative. And part of that is actually because of where the funds are flowing. So if you look at all the investor calls, and if we were to reference how many times different companies are actually making reference to the term sustainability in their investor calls, that number has been growing kind of 7-8% times what they used to happen a few years back. And also we know that attention flows where money goes, right? So 130 trillion has been committed to net zero by the Glasgow Financial Alliances towards spearheading that net zero agenda. But we've also seen a lot more movement happening with regards to the standards boards around harmonizing some of those actual ESG standards. So how we measure things, what are the important standards? Through that harmonization, what we've seen is that there's a lot more, I guess, accountability, therefore, that can be taken by not just governments, but also businesses to hold themselves accountable, and also for the external world to keep the businesses accountable too. And the impact of the race to zero means that all the companies to win the hearts and the minds of their employees, of their consumers, and actually of their other stakeholders, such as investors as well. Now we're seeing that 70% of the FTSE 100 companies have committed to net zero goals. The thing to balance that with some of this is that we need to make sure that actually social progress within our communities is not being kind of held to ransom with regards to some of the environmental impact that we need to balance. So there is that I guess the kind of synergies that we need to create around the social progress versus the biodiversity versus the actual kind of nature protection that we're trying to kind of take place in certain societies, and making sure that we bring those two things together. With the amount of investment that we're seeing within technology, especially around digital transformation, and this 34 trillion that we're hearing that is being committed already in the next kind of 2025 to 2030 towards that digital transformation in itself has impact which can benefit the ESG agenda greatly. So all of these things are just basically giving us not only an opportunity, but also an ability to take action to solve some of the problems that we're seeing around us at the moment. So it's not all doom and gloom. There are actions that are being taken to really move the needle on this. Moving on to this. So what does this all mean? What does it mean for organizations? What does it mean for society? What does it mean for, I guess, many of you in your roles within your organizations? A lot of it, I think, comes down to the redefining the success metrics for organizations. How do we balance out what traditionally companies held themselves accountable to in terms of financial measures, and shift that lens to become a little bit more holistic and look at ESG measures in a more kind of accountable manner to say, who are my stakeholders? That whenever I conduct my business, there is a bunch of people out there that directly or indirectly are being impacted by what I do. So if we look at the affected groups, it goes all the way from the top in terms of the global economies, in terms of governments, from looking at just jobs and GDPs to kind of saying, actually, let's look at the citizens and stakeholders and bringing all of them to the table in policy making. And then we've got things around capital markets, where we're moving from financial returns to investors to actually stakeholder value. And then the role of the chairs, the CEOs and the boards, they're having to challenge themselves a lot more in terms of what is their role when it comes to holding together. Because if you think about the global kind of the macro level and the micro level, businesses now actually are that kind of that integration point, and they're probably the CEOs and the boards have the most influence these days on being able to make some of these changes. The organization themselves within, they need to look at how am I making my decisions? What is the data that I have? Have I got the right people and the right performance measures in place to make sure that I'm incentivizing my leaders to make the right choices and developing their capabilities within the sustainability agenda. And then we'll also, the other one that impacts into your organization is the teams on the ground. How are we trying to change their mindset? And what we're actually hearing around the patch is actually the employees themselves are a lot more sometimes passionate about these things than actually leadership maybe at the moment. So there's a little bit of a kind of like the meeting of the two minds to say, do you really think you're doing as well as you think you are in terms of what the employees are expecting? And we'll get a little bit more into that in the next section. So that's kind of high level. Why should companies even care? I mean, people sometimes you have this question saying, well, is it really for businesses to solve this problem? And I think it's always been the right thing to do. So when people say we do it because it's the right thing to do, well, actually, it's always been the right thing to do. But people haven't taken action on this in the way in which we're asking them to take action now. So what we're seeing is actually the mounting evidence and the kind of data that's coming through is that the business themselves, by actually focusing on sustainability, will be able to unlock lots and lots of tangible benefits that directly impact their own performance. So the United Nations Global Compact report actually did some fantastic high-level summaries, and there are some details you'll see in the source material. But at a summary level, companies that are more geared towards having sustainability embedded can actually increase their share price by as much as 6%. I mean, that's phenomenal, right? In terms of the company's metrics, they can increase their sales as much as 20% and employee productivity by 13%. But the other big one that I really liked was actually employee turnover. And especially when we look at the millennials and the Generation Z, Gen Z generation coming through, a lot of the time people are leaving because they're not finding there's a connection between what their own purpose-led lives that they want to lead and the choices they want to make and their organization. So this actually helps to decrease employee turnover by as much as 50%. I was quite amazed to see that fact, but it shows that we can do a lot more with our people. And actually operating costs, I mean, billions, there's every industry has so many cost benefits from actually adopting sustainability practices. So I'd say that's kind of the business case for all of you that are kind of very analytical and business minded. That's the business case. And I would encourage you to take these slides, share them within your organization so people don't just say it's just fluff, it's real tangible benefits. So this is a kind of really, from the United Nations Secretary, there's an address to the UN General around the importance, but also the fact that actually people are not waking up as much as they should be. The international community is willing, but actually maybe not quite wanting to be the front runner. So we need organizations and we need people like yourselves to actually take this back to their own organization to say, we need to be front runners on this, because if companies don't start coming to the front, then the SDG goals are basically going to lose momentum. I mean, there's these are the term SDGs are issuing an SOS. And so this is, we're seeing a lot of news coverage as well around climate risk. But I think the real call is that we all need to come together as one large coalition, one large community, and truly operate as a united nation. So after just kind of providing you with that summary, and I'm sure you all come to the table with a lot of your own understanding of this as well, I'd like to just kind of pause here to conduct a quick kind of Mentimeter to understand from you, what do you think it means to be a sustainable organization? And we have two options with which to take part in that Mentimeter. You can either go to open up the Mentico.com website and use the code 38748002, or you can scan the QR code here. And I encourage all of you, please, to participate as we can have a much richer conversation based on the inputs we're seeing.
All right, Caroline, do you want to stop sharing and I can take over?
Here we see the responses coming in. Future focus is a sense of long-term of time, future focus, long-term, the sustainability, collaborative. Yes, we'll talk about collaboration quite a bit throughout this session. Responsible.
That's a big theme. I think the responsible word is definitely something that's resonating, which is good to see. I think they say with leadership comes a great responsibility.
Authentic and ethical as well, to go towards in this direction. Any other? Yeah, future focus comes back quite a bit.
Great. I think we've got most of the inputs in. So
yeah.
I mean, it looks as if the theme very much is on people understanding and recognizing that they have a responsibility in the way in which they conduct business today, in terms of the impact that it has on the future generations as well, and the future environment of the planet. So I think, I mean, this actually is a fantastic, I should take a photo of this because it's the two key themes that are at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals as well from the United Nations. Great, thank you.
I'll go back to sharing.
Sure. Okay, so essentially it's interesting because the two themes that this group picked out is very, very closely tied to the statement that the United Nations Brundtland Commission in 1987 had stated, which is essentially that organizations that follow or are committed to advancing the principles of sustainable development are meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So responsible and future focused. Fantastic to see this group already on that point. Great, thank you. So moving on now. Now, I want to just give you a high level. We're going to get a little bit more into the detail of this between myself and Caroline. But there are, when Accenture looked at how do we shape a sustainable organization, there were 4 key ingredients. One was around the principles behind how the strategy, the goal setting, and then the kind of high level kind of North Star of an organization should be based on. And then looking at the people, how do we make sure that that North Star is aligned to the people within the organization around workforce, leadership, and employee development as well. And then once you've done that, how do you actually make sure that you kind of keep yourself accountable to that? And how do you make sure you communicate what you're doing? So transparent and open communication is another pillar within the ingredients of building a sustainable organization, and we'll go into more detail on that too. And then actually, what does it mean in terms of a mindset shift? So from the mindset we've had in the past, and then what Einstein saying, what got you here isn't the way in which you approach a problem in the past isn't going to help you solve it for the future. I'm sure I've not quoted it fully in the way he said it, but essentially it's a case of if we keep doing the same thing, we're not going to be able to solve the problem. So an innovative and a collaborative mindset is that kind of growth mindset that we need. That's going to be critical in terms of building a sustainable organization, and we'll take you through a little bit more of the detail on that. So this is the core framework, and then we'll get into, again, just before we get into that, well, what is the I guess, again, coming back to the business rationale on the next slide, so we can look at the business rationale around why we want to do these things. And it comes back to, it makes good business sense. It's good for the environment. It's a good thing to do. It's the right thing to do for our stakeholders, but actually it makes good business sense as well. So organizations that have sustainability embedded, deeply embedded, actually outperform their peer group by 21% on both profitability, but also in terms of the impact they can make on the environment and around society, and therefore keeping your employees and your other stakeholders happy as well. Now that's kind of what this data shows. Now we wanted to put this slide up here just because I think one of the themes when we were doing a lot of our research within Accenture, and we had, I think it's about 1,122 CEOs that we'd interviewed across multiple countries, multiple organizations and industries. What we realized actually through that was, as you interview the CEOs and then you interview employees in their organizations as well, there is actually a big difference between what the leaders think they're actually achieving and what the employees on the ground actually feel that their organization's achieving. So around the plan side, I mean, the question of we have a robust plan in place, 68% of executive felt that they had, whereas only 21% of employees felt they had. And this could be because when plans are put in place, it's done at the senior leadership level, and people don't always communicate and cascade that down to all their employees. So I think one of the pillars around transparent communication is very critical to address that gap. When we talk about measurement, we say we adopted, how we adopted and reported on measurement sustainability goals. Again, a fairly big discrepancy between the executives and the employees. So again, a little bit more to be done on making this a lot more public to be held accountable. In terms of whether the right management practices have been embedded to take into account stakeholder perspectives within decision making, that seemed to have a little bit more closer alignment, but still there's still a substantial gap that we need to make sure we address. So the next sections that we're going to cover you through is to try and give you some frameworks and some ideas around how some of those gaps, if you have them in your own organization, could be addressed. Okay, so we're going to deep dive into the first one of these taking actions, which is around principles. So what is principles prioritization? So essentially, I mean, we've got 3 areas here, and there could be more. You may find within your organization, you want to add some additional elements into here as you take these back to your own leadership. But the 3 key ones for us is principles prioritization, goal setting, and integrating through incentives. And if we go through each one now in more detail, all of them essentially are trying to address a key kind of expectation, and it's the stakeholder expectation. But it's not really stakeholders in the old sense, which was just purely the company seeing that their board had to answer to investors, and that was their only, I guess, stakeholder. Now, interesting quote here from the CEO of BlackRock, where he kind of says society is demanding that companies, both public and private, serve a social purpose. So I'm sure many of you would have read in the news what happened with regards to BlackRock and the way in which they were very vocal and very public with regards to where they were going to invest funds and where they were not going to invest funds. And there was backlash, right? Let's be transparent around the reaction that happened in the markets. There was a backlash on them, but what they felt was actually that even that awareness, that the fact that backlash and it got into the newspapers, and a lot of people started discussing whether can businesses actually do the right thing for their different stakeholders, or should they really be only accountable to investors. So you can see some metrics here around employees, consumers, and investors around what they actually believe an organization should be held accountable to. I won't drain all of these because you will have all these slides and this material, but it is important that organizations raise the awareness that they are seeing themselves as being held accountable to multiple stakeholders. So we talk about principles, and it really starts at the top. If you don't have principled leadership, it's very difficult to then see those good intentions or otherwise kind of filtering through to everywhere else within your ecosystem, both internally and externally. Now, when we talk about starting at the top, we're actually not just talking about C-suite, we're actually talking about the board level. So the boards essentially need to be the ones that define what sustainability actually means for the company that they are board of directors for, because different companies, different industries will have specific issues that are very material to that company. So the board needs to help identify which are the priority issues. Prioritization is very important on this because we can't tackle everything. Clarify why sustainability is important to the company, because they then can actually put that into their strategy and get buy-in from the employees and from the business partners. And to ensure that the company is actually successful with their sustainability strategy, the board cannot simply put the strategy and then ignore it. They've really got to make sure that they are actively involved in overseeing the implementation and making sure that management is meeting those targets. And if not, they're actually, as part of their duty of care and the concept of the stewardship that directors are all under, they need to make some active interventions to basically request updates. They need to ask the critical questions, and they need to insert themselves into that review process to make sure that they are continuing to give the right direction. So there's a great case study that we can share, which is around Novozymes, where the board actually recognized that sustainable technologies can actually, by adopting these, can help save on raw material and reduce the use of chemicals, whilst also increasing energy efficiency and improving the quality of products for customers. So they kind of like linked it through all the various different parts of the whole value chain for them. And with this ambition, they actually kind of looked at sustainability, not just being something nice to do that you put in a strategy at the start of the year. They actually embedded it as a key business driver. So that process, I think, is something that's very, very critical for boards to go through. And if any of you have direct access to board members, I think it's vital to have those conversations with them around what is their outlook and what is their involvement in this, and actually for C-suites to proactively ask for board members to give that direction. And if there's any dialogue that needs to be had with board members, I mean, there's lots of resources available to help you do that as well. I'm happy to share more on that if anybody wants to find out more. Now, all of these principles that we talk about have to be embedded within the United Nations Global Compact. These are the 10 principles, which, if you're not familiar with them, I would encourage you to visit the website, which is at the bottom there, the UN Global Compact, 10 principles of the UN. These highlight in a lot more detail the rationale and actually the kind of the requirement that businesses need to make sure that they are adhering to in terms of meeting the sustainability development goals. I'm not going to drain a lot of these, but I would encourage you to take time, and with your teams as well, to make sure you revisit these. So we talked about principal leadership. So now looking at, once you've got the leadership on board, the leadership their role is to help you prioritize. Because obviously, as I said earlier, it's difficult for business leads to focus on everything. So they've got to really be told, these are your priorities. And the prioritization process really needs to take into consideration two key things. One is, how do you minimize risks to people and the environment? And then how do you maximize the beneficial SDG related components with regards to products, services, and investments? So we talk about risk mitigation, and we talk about, kind of benefits maximization. And the benefits really should align with the company strategy, so that the right allocation of resources, of budget, etc., actually are reflected within the day-to-day business that the business leaders and the operating units need to conduct. Otherwise, if you don't have the right resource allocation, it becomes very difficult to meet some of that high-level intentions. They also need to be able to help identify new actions that are necessary to contribute, and avoid the and we see some of this happening actually, and I'm sure you've all come across this in either other organizations you're familiar with, maybe even your own organization perhaps, where people would cherry pick things. And there's a lot of kind of SDG washing, where there's lots of marketing and there's a lot of spin that goes on, but actually consumers are becoming very, very savvy. Investors are becoming very, very savvy. I think it's becoming harder and harder for people to keep doing that cherry picking SDG. So the great case study we can share is from Safari.com, Safaricom, which they actually took the SDG goals. And if you look at the statement on the right-hand side, and I won't read each one of them out, but what I want to call out is it's a deliberative use of keywords which really connect to a lot of the goals. I mean, they've covered probably I think more than 50-60% of the goals that the United Nations have set. And they've consciously chosen language that reflects how the actions are going to be taken, the way in which they're going to be doing that. So we're going to deliver connectivity, and we're going to do it by enabling this, and we're going to do it through this way, and we're going to make sure that the expectations are set here, and we'll manage. So I loved the way they actually use different words to tie in. So I think I'd encourage all of you to go back to your organizations and say, okay, let's look at my kind of our priority statement or mission statement and see how many of those actually align to the United Nations development goals. The third one that we had within the principles pillar of the key ingredients was around goal setting. So once you've actually defined your kind of your leadership, your priority, you then say, let's convert those priorities into goals for our team, so they actually know from a day-to-day and from a quarter-to-quarter perspective, what is it that they're going to be measured on. So, and this is the core focus of the program, and the summary of this, and actually there's a lot more detail we can get into behind this, and but at the high level, it's around making sure that the scope of the goals are aligned with regards to strategic priorities. So which are the KPIs? Which are the KPIs that make a positive contribution to the SDGs, and which are the ones that actually can have potential negative impact? So we can't just ignore the ones that can have a negative impact, because you could end up finding that your plus here, +2 ends up with a lot of negative somewhere else, and you're not net better off. And we talk in Accenture a lot about being net better off. And a lot of organizations are moving towards being net positive. So creating improvement opportunities to make improvements and looking across the entire value chain, not just in one or two areas, but the entire value chain, and understanding what is our baseline. So we can have very lofty goals, but actually if those goals are so far removed from where we are today in terms of foot in today, foot in tomorrow, the foot in today needs to say, what's my baseline? How have I been doing the last couple of years? So where can I improve from my current position? And one of the examples was around water usage. Wherever water, and everybody uses water, it doesn't matter what you do in the world, we all use water. It's one of those critical essentials. So you could look at how much, do you have data around what you've used in the past? Can you start measuring some of this? And then how do you then say, well, going forward, I'm going to reduce by X, Y, and Z. And then making sure that the ambition that's being set is actually something you strive towards, right? It shouldn't be something that's easy to reach, because that's when people start to cherry pick easy things to do, and then we can show our external companies we've done fantastically well, but actually it hasn't really moved the needle when it comes to that cross collaboration and that we need from everybody to make sure that we are all being very aggressive in the goals we set. And then once you set yourself a higher goal, what we tend to find is that our teams actually, because it is a challenge, they will actually get behind this, and there's a lot more innovation that's required and some creativity from them as well as to how they help the company meet those aggressive goals around SDG. And then the communication part is right. We need to make sure that this is being communicated internally and externally, because there's a lot of criticism that companies can face from external sources if they're not seen to be doing enough with regards to their sustainability agenda. So being very clear externally and internally around what those goals are is very key to success as well. So next, we're going to look at, once you've got the leadership, you've got the principles, you've got the goal strategy, how are you actually going to make why should people care, right? People need to be incentivized. So they always say in terms of human behavior, it's either the stick or the carrot, and often it's if you can have the incentive, which is the carrot, to keep people aligned with the company's principles and goals, all the way from the top, from the board, all the way right down to your most junior employee. And the incentivization is almost kind of put into your policies, your performances, your pay grade system, your promotion processes, your recruitment processes. You'll find actually that it kind of, when you embed it in that way, it's almost like embedding sustainability by design. You're designing it into your overall organizational structure as to how you're going to run. And some of the ideas around making sure that actually when boards are hiring people into the key roles, they actually ask the candidate, not just the kind of usual CV type roles. It's actually for them to demonstrate that they understand how the complex sustainability issues will impact the industry that they're joining or the company that they're joining, and make their own commitment to how they're going to advance some of those ESG standards, and understanding that actually do they understand enough about the baseline that we're operating from as well. And providing track record, not just of having delivered great P&L. That used to be the kind of standard. Somebody came in and said, I met my targets, I beat my targets. This is around saying, actually, I'm now responsible as a board member to a lot of other stakeholders. Can you help me to make sure that you have the skill set? So recruitment is very key, and the lens that we use with which to recruit people, it has to shift as well. And then the compensation package. We've got a great example here from Tesco, where they actually tied themselves into SDG goals around food wastage. And then they made sure that within the organization, that 25% of the performance share plan given to directors actually depended on Tesco being able to meet sustainability measures. And this included not just food wastage, but also gender, ethnicity representation, carbon reduction, food waste reduction, and all within Tesco's own operations. So this is not the scope 3 stuff necessarily, but within their own operations. So if you don't make something stick, you have to create the stickiness, and incentivizing people to do the right thing actually creates the right kind of stickiness. Okay, so I mean, a lot of different principles that we looked at there, but based on what you've learned, or based on what you may already have seen within your own organization, it'd be great if you could share how you might best entrench some of these principles into your company, or any best practices that you might want to share that you already maybe doing in your own company, so others can on the call can learn as well. So we're going to switch back to the Mentimeter, and in the chat I think you've got the Menti code again. It's 3874-8002. So I encourage you all to type up sentences and ideas of how you might best embed some of these sustainable principles into your company. And we're not going to necessarily hold you accountable to doing these right now. It's more just to get the ideas flowing as well. That boards to make manager responsible for the delivery, definitely. Yeah, I think the alignment is a key part as well, yeah. And KPIs, I mean, you know, businesses are run based on data KPIs, so having the right KPIs is very, very critical. Yeah, board education. I think there's an assumption that people that are filling board roles should already know this stuff. And unfortunately, most board members, with all due respect to board members, I mean, they're probably like myself, they've probably been in the organization a long time, but they're also, that mindset shift we're talking about here is actually equally important at the top as it is at the bottom. Sometimes even more so. I think there's a lot of reverse mentoring could be really useful here as well. Okay, so some great ideas around alignment, and actually a lot of great feedback around the board's involvement into making sure the organization holds itself true to its goals. Yeah, and the cascade, so the communication part is actually very important. We're going to come on to some of that later on as well, the KPIs. So you guys are really well aligned because you understand the principles that are needed, but also in terms of how some of this could happen. So we're going to go on to explore very soon some of these ideas. Great, thank you. So next we're going to move on to people, and I'm going to hand over to Caroline. She's part of our TNO talent and organization within Accenture, and is very experienced in this arena. Over to you, Caroline.
Thanks. So second ingredient for shaping organization, it's really about people. So why people? Because people are really at the heart of every transformation, at the heart of change. So it's about creating best practices amongst your leadership teams, building inclusive and future-ready workforce, and empowering your employees. So there are many approaches to embedding sustainability into an organization. So the first part is very much at a board level, at a CEO level, and we've talked briefly about this on the principles and on embedding sustainability into that strategic visions and that these companies' principles. Here we're talking about sustainable change and transformation. So first, it can be leadership and culture. How do you embed behaviors within your organization that are linked to sustainability? How do you make clear commitments and pledges towards sustainability? How do you shift some of the mindset and some of the ways of working within the organization, very much across all levels, from the leadership to the employees? And then sustainability up model and org design. So it's enabling an enterprise-wide transformation with long-term impact and long-term change by having sustainable business models, by having the right governance and the right structure to go around it. It's about learning and skilling. This is very important. It's about enhancing some of the skills and capabilities when it comes to sustainability. So whether it be from an awareness level or building the foundations to much more deeper sustainability focused content. And when we talk about responsible skilling, it's not only linked to the topic, but also if some jobs are displaced or are modified, how do you reskill your people into these new jobs and enable them to take on different tasks? And then sustainable HR and rewards. This is embedding sustainability into the performance system, into the recognition, and also throughout the entire talent lifecycle and strategy. And last but not least, it's championing inclusion, diversity, and equity within the organization, but also outside of the organization. So the first one, when we talk about creating best practices amongst the leadership, it's very much about increasing effectiveness of the executive team. And you're the audience, you might be within that executive team or working closely with your executive team on the objective is really ensuring it is like the team is fit for the future. So what we see with our clients and our partners are some of the business drivers to this. It's communication, decision-making, and prioritization amongst the team is key to deliver culture change and key performance of the organization. This requires also the right structure and alignment between the different teams and the processes to enable collaboration across the organization. And also another critical element to success is alignment towards around the CEO agenda and really respect for that CEO agenda or the direction that the CEO sets. So this can be turned into opportunities. So it's building healthy habits of the executive team through communication and inclusion. It's about reducing some of the barriers between different cultures, between different functions and different sides of the organization to increase that transparency and that collaboration. It's developing a strong sense of purpose or meaning or direction into some of the corporate strategy. And then establishing not only individual commitments, but also team and organizational commitments to increase that accountability and that empowerment. So you might ask, what does success look like? So the outcomes of this, it's a transition to a one company mindset driven by that leadership team. It's understanding some of the barriers and quickly identifying and co-creating together solutions to overcome these challenges. And then focusing on listening to people, creating that safe and open environment to learn and grow together. And then collaboration across the different teams, which we'll talk about as one of our core ingredients later on. So we've developed a 5-step framework that we can use throughout to really embed sustainability at the leadership level, but that's also valid across all levels of the organization. So it's starting small, basically, the first step, towards scaling, the last step. Firstly, it's understanding leadership approach to sustainability. So Dali touched upon this with the perception gap. Leaders think very differently sometimes, and there's a gap between what leaders think of what the company is doing when it comes to sustainability versus what the employees are doing, or also external perceptions. Co-creating that direction and that vision, and then designing proof of concepts or experiments, and then piloting some of these sustainability initiatives by running some behavioral experiments within your team to actually embed these habits. This takes time and practice, but this is very much to embed new habits or learn like new knowledge throughout, and then receive the gather the feedback from those pilot initiatives, learn from the learnings, the best practices, reiterate and improve those pilot initiatives to then be able to scale and really sustain that change in behavior and that adoption of sustainability. The second one was building a representative workforce. So it's integrating diversity and inclusion targets and really thinking about diversity and inclusion throughout the entire talent lifecycle, but also within your workforce. So we know that a diverse workshop actually leads to a more innovative and productive and overperforming companies, but there's still quite a gap there. And we see that 85% of positions, for example, in the executive teams are held by whites. And also some of the current practices that we actually use in hiring processes that intend to reduce bias, it's actually proven that it can even amplify that bias. And then lastly, we heard that through our research with some of the CEOs that we interviewed, there is an urgency to embedding sustainability, and CEOs recognize that. However, only 38% of companies have publicly announced like clear D&I targets within their strategy. But companies that foster a diverse and inclusive workforce are more likely to exceed financial targets, are more performing, more likely to become innovative and agile, and also achieve better outcomes. But when you talk about like non-monetary benefits, that includes reputation, branding, also understanding customers' needs. And to be able to understand customers' needs, then you can develop services and products that are specifically targeted to those needs. A stronger talent pool. So this is very much about not missing out on the marginalized population and integrating that wider diversity. And team collaboration that we'll also talk about a bit later. So we can use that same 5-step approach in this case for inclusion and diversity. So you start small, you assess your baseline, your current experiences and capabilities. You co-create some maturity models when it comes to inclusion and diversity, and identify some targeted actions, interventions within your organization. You can promote inclusive innovation and design into your company culture, into the development of some of your products, some of your offerings or services. And then really focus on that growth mindset, continuous improvement learning from data, analytics, feedback that you gather from your employees, but also from your customers, towards really embedding that feedback and then iterating and scaling this to ensure inclusion and diversity is embedded for the long run. So we have a perfect example or a case study to support that framework. So Ria, the founder and CEO of Indian Food Packaging, really connected with her team around the importance of women. So when you think about start small, so like the phase 1 and 2, she connected with her teams, set a clear tone on the importance of women, then piloted some initiatives. So that's step 3. So organizing some open and regular communications with some of the male managers to really understand some of the concerns around hiring women. And then more like the building and the scaling, which is really much embedding some processes, some appraisal and review that integrate the importance of women, and what she achieved was over 30% of her workforce are now women, and there's growing awareness amongst the company around that. Lastly, it's empowering your employees. So we all know when we try to change our habits or our behaviors, it's confusing, it's a long process, it's very difficult, but actually the first step to real behavior change is a mindset shift. So it's really diving head down into the challenge, putting or tackling that challenge with urgency. And from a company perspective, it's equipping our workforce with the right skills, with the right tools, with the right ecosystem. So a case study for this is actually an Accenture case study. So we have about 750,000 employees across the globe. We focus on different geographies, different topics, different industries, and obviously we have very different backgrounds and skill sets. So what we've started by doing is upskilling our own people. So building the foundation. So that's very much at the 101 level awareness. So we've developed what we call the Sustainability Quotient learning module. So we have a few modules with key topics of sustainability today, so some of the foundations, and then we can enhance those skills and dive a little deeper into the real sustainability growth priorities of the world today. So we have examples like net zero transition, responsible value chain, green software, green IT. We also leverage our strong collaboration with some of our partners, our thought leaders, SMEs, and our clients as well, to be able to share knowledge and co-create some of the solutions for our projects. And then last but not least, resources and tools. This can be linked to research. It can be opportunities to learn. It can be, we also have created internally in Southeast Asia a sustainability squad. So it's also an informal network of sustainability enthusiasts where we can freely share knowledge around sustainability. Okay, so based on this topic of people, which is a strong interest of mine as well, based on what you've learned today, how might you best empower your employees? Can you share with us? Okay, it's back to the same Menti, so I'll give Caitlin back the screen. I'm excited to see your answers. How would you best empower your employees? Don't be shy. As Dali mentioned, we won't hold you accountable.
I think any ideas that you may already have implemented, or what ideas you would like to implement within your organization?
Start with awareness raising, yes. And someone mentioned as well, start at the board level as well, or the leadership level. Leading from CEO. Walking the talk as well. Engagement. Training, upskilling, bonuses, interesting. Provide an open space for employees to be truly heard and valued. Yes, that's very much key, creating that safe and open environment. This comes from the top usually, or within the teams as well. This is very important. The idea of a culture of feedback, and as Dali mentioned as well, like even mentoring or reverse mentoring. Vertical lines of communication, so clear communication, that's actually a core ingredient of sustainable organizations that we're going to talk about.
I think Jacinta's put into the chat around line management support, so making sure that the employees feel they have line management support to truly embed and live the sustainability goals. It's very key.
Any other? Line management support, yes. Feeling empowered as well, feeling heard. This goes along this. E-learning regularly, that's true. That's a key topic of enhancing the skills. Being given more and more opportunities to learn.
value their work. Yes, right.
Building internal capacity. So we see the topic of skilling, raising that awareness on sustainability across all levels. That comes back quite a bit here, which is totally on point. Constant engagement, yes, that increases empowerment, motivation also from the employees, accountability.
These are all such great ideas, and I just want to remind everybody, when we saw in the United Nations, some of their kind of summary of the reasons why this makes good business sense, employee retention went up by 50% for those organizations who are able to embed sustainability into throughout their business. So a lot of what you're discussing here would be something that would contribute towards your own employee retention.
Thank you very much for your answers. We can move to the next ingredient. Let me go back. A short break.
So we can take a quick 5-minute coffee break, bio break, and Caroline and myself would stay online. If anybody had any questions they want to post, please, we'll take an opportunity to look at those. But otherwise, please come back in. It's 10:04, maybe by 10:10. That'd be really great. Thank you. See you back soon. Can we just give a minute or two for people to return? Okay, hopefully you're all kind of settling back into your seats, and we can look to get started in the next few seconds. So welcome back from your break, and hopefully you've had some food for thought already in terms of the ingredients and the frameworks shared. We're going to cover the next two items on the the kind of four key ingredients, and the one next is actually more around how do we make sure that we hold ourselves accountable as an organization around some of the things that are happening, and how do we make sure there's transparent and open communication both within the organization as well as some sort of feedback mechanism loop with regards to the various stakeholders that we talked about. And the objective of all of these is to make sure that we can monitor and improve performance. So moving on to the next page, thank you. So why is transparency and reporting, why is it important? Well, for a start, there's a lot more pressure coming from other organizations, but also a lot more, I guess, interest groups that have been created, which have a lot of, I guess, platforms, presence. There's a lot more formal routes, such as the PRI, which is a group that's been formed that looks at responsible investments. They now have 1,200 investors who manage assets up to 40 trillion. So you can see that it's not just small numbers now, these amounts are increasing. And investors are continuously looking and asking questions around, how is my money being used? Is it damaging the world? Is it damaging the environment around me? Or is it being used to do good in the world? So organizations like the PRI or even Sustainable Stock Exchange, which has around 16 exchanges that represent circa 17,000 listed companies that have a market capitalization in excess of 36 trillion, are also being set up because the demand from investors is there. And it's estimated that there's around 80% of medium and large organizations worldwide that are now reporting sustainability. And I mentioned at the beginning of this conference that if you look at the investors' reports, and if you were to go through that and actually count up the number of times the word sustainability shows up, the multifold increases that we've seen, especially post-pandemic and post the COVID, is that actually it's become almost like the central theme running across many investor calls. And there's a case study we have from Ayala, which is operating out of the Philippines, and they've actually looked at actively disclosing the beneficial activities and the services which they are doing that actually help to have a net positive impact on the SDG goals. So they've got two business units called AC Automotive and IMI, which contribute to goal number 9 on the SDG around industry, innovation and infrastructure, which looks at making sure that the products that they're creating, so the first manufactured in Philippines, commercially viable electric vehicle, because there's a lot of attempts to make electric vehicles, but actually they're not always commercially viable. And many organizations see themselves entering that market and then exiting that market because actually it's very competitive and it's actually very difficult to get hold of component parts for that particular sector. But this company actually managed to make something which is commercially viable and accepted by the market, but then also it managed to do something which linked the goals to making sure that the cities and the communities within which this particular product was being manufactured and released were actually going to meet in goal number 11 around sustainable cities and communities. And it was important that they reported on this externally because it incentivizes their own leadership and their own employees to do more, but also it meant that actually it has impacts around their own external perception of the company as well, with regards to the market, consumers, and the employees as well. So you may ask kind of question around how do we report? Well, if a particular organization has joined the United Nations Global Compact, it's actually a requirement that they have as part of they issue an annual COP, which is a public disclosure, which goes out to their stakeholders around how have they actually progressed in implementing the 10 principles into their strategies and then into executing around their operations as well. So it's a fairly detailed kind of what it needs to contain. I mean, we talked earlier about the principal leadership. It has to have a statement by the chief executive around the support, but also the commitment around the goals and about the ongoing initiatives and the principle that they're doing. So they can't just be a one-time statement that they may release. It has to be a continuous assessment and a restatement almost to make sure they're aligned to the principles governed by the United Nations. And it has to be a description of, so rather than just kind of high level strategy, it has to then go down to the next level of practical actions that's been taken to make sure that they're implementing these principles, and then to actually be able to measure the outcome. So it's a 3-step process. It's the intent, it's the how we're going to do it, and this is how we're actually progressing. So I think the 3 steps are very, very key to making sure that we report transparently and in an open manner. Moving on next. The other reason why, not just because, as part of the United Nations requirement, but actually stakeholder feedback. So stakeholders are continually, I guess, critiquing whether the organizations have got long-term longevity in terms of how long they're going to last. And part of that longevity assessment is the key, kind of having sustainability as a key theme towards a company's long-term success, but not just the company's own long-term success, but actually it's we talked earlier around, the future focused strategies that we need to have to make sure that actually, aside from keeping themselves alive as a company, they're actually empowering the communities and society around them. So they're leaving everybody else net better off, as opposed to being other communities and people being net worse off. And research has shown that the internal pressure that's coming from employees is actually becoming one of the main drivers of the environmental and the wider sustainability strategy. And it's because if you want to have good people working for you, you need to make sure that what you do as a company is aligned to the kind of very principle and mission-led, purpose-led life that many, many individuals, especially post-COVID, are actually asking for. So how do we do this? How do we make sure that we're actually able to hold the number one, which is kind of like, how do we start with the CEO and the board? How do we make sure that they're actually able to be holding themselves accountable? I mean, one of the ideas that's being used by a number of successful companies is having an advisory board. So you can have a formal board, which is the board of directors, and you've got an actual kind of feedback loop that sits around that, where you invite stakeholders to represent themselves in that kind of advisory board, and they can be made up of people from the ESG communities, people that are coming from internally within their own internal kind of corporate citizenship programs. There's a great case study from SK Telecom where they actually had kind of 5 committees under the board of directors, And in these committees, they invited the committees to actually challenge the company around the sustainability principles to make sure that actually the growth and the value that's been created was not conflicting with some of the longer term sustainability goals that SK Telecom's management had been asked to implement. And for them, it's not a one-time thing, it's a ongoing investment. So they make sure that the committee meets 4 times a year, which is a quarterly process, to make sure that the management actually sees and is reminded always that sustainability is an integral issue, and it's raised the profile of sustainability internally, and therefore the board, it's if it's in your face all the time, you can't ignore it. And I think that's the key thing is it has to be in your face all the time. Okay, so one of the ways, this is kind of getting a little bit more into the detail of this, and we won't get a chance to drain all of this here, but some of the ideas around, once you've actually kind of set the actions, you need to then think about what are the right kind of data sets, and what are the right categories, what are the right indicators, how are you going to measure progress, essentially, right? People always say, what gets measured gets done. And, you measure what you treasure is the other saying, which is always kind of holds true when it comes to sustainability, even more than other areas, because it's a case of, it's very easy to lose sight of things if you're not actually keeping them. People have a lot of dashboards. We've seen some really good examples in companies are where they'll have a dashboard reporting. In the old days, the business BI dashboards were very much financially orientated. Now they'll include things around, if you're a company that's involved in, for example, we had examples of people like Anglo. We've got the kind of resources companies where they actually would look at, although they might be a steel manufacturer or they may be producing waste which is detrimental to the environment, but can they actually then partner with other organizations perhaps? So this comes into the collaboration point as well. And as part of the circular economy, the waste that one organization is producing could actually be, someone's, let's say someone's waste is often somebody else's treasure. So you can actually make sure that another organization is able to use that material and produce their product. So example was around nappies, so disposable nappies being used as part of laying down roads. And then there's an example of a company which produces a beverage, and they actually were now contributing towards, in Indonesia, having a water reservoir, that whenever there was a hardship around water, this beverage company was able, and it's Coca-Cola actually, they were actually able to, the local communities could use that water reservoir. So their ambition was, for every liter of water that we take out from the environment, we will create a way to kind of reimburse the local communities to have access to that. So those are really great roles. And I would encourage you to think about your own business and your own industry and what could be some of those really key critical. Sometimes it can be very simple. If you're refurbishing your office, rather than throwing away chairs, track them, track those chairs, put a sticker on them if it needs to be a QR code, see how much you can reuse that chair prior to kind of putting it on the depreciation and writing it off. I mean, there's a very simple ideas, but and there's many, many more that can be shared. So we won't get a chance to drain all of this. So if I can move to the next section. So one of the case studies I did want to share with you was around Nestle. So Nestle is an organization which has been working in farming communities, and this always brings it home for me, because I said at the beginning, coming from a farming community, which was very sustainable in the way they lived, until people decided to almost kind of become more progressive and move away from the traditional methods of farming into kind of more modern methods, which does destroy crops, and it destroys soaks up a lot more water. But it also means that for farming communities especially, there's a lot of malnutrition and lack of access to sanitation and hygiene. So what Nestle has done is they've actually developed a framework and a diagnostic tool that allows them to have insights into what are some of the challenges in particular regions that some farmers are facing. They took some baseline data, they collected it over 11 countries, and they try to then put in place some interventions based on the data and the insights, where they could actually help the farmers, which are key part of their ecosystem and their kind of their value chain to make that more of a sustainable value chain. And this went all the way from looking at children's eating and healthier initiatives in those rural communities, providing education around the importance of some of the sanitation hygiene awareness, as well as actually intervening with regards to training farmers about nutrition and promoting certain kitchen gardens themselves. So it really is about that kind of closed loop with your community that you're working in. Organizations can no longer just take from a community, they need to be able to give back as well. We're going to move next into the innovation and collaboration, but I don't know if there's so we can probably do a Mentimeter at the end. We can incorporate these two areas and look at how best we can involve some of these ideas into your organization as well. So I'm going to hand over now to Coraline.
So this is the last ingredient of the sustainable organization. So it's about a mindset for innovation and its collaboration, leveraging the ecosystem around you. When we talk about innovation, like what is an innovator's mindset? This is very much about embracing innovation and using new technology towards that innovation. So we have different principles here. We-perceive challenge as opportunities. Actually, the market associated with the global goals is valued at $12 trillion a year by 2030. So it's really shifting from challenge to opportunity and actually not perceiving sustainability as a trade-off with growth. 10x your ambition. So it's not just focusing on doubling down or incremental change. It's really about breakthrough targets, really breakthroughs. So increasing your ambitions by tenfold. Love the problem, not the solution. So it's looking at your customers' needs, looking at the challenges and the problems that they create, and then assessing where is technology at? How can we use technologies to overcome those problems? And then connecting the dots between the two. So invite others to join in. Basically, no one can do it alone. So this is very much of a collaboration of all types of stakeholders across industries, geographies. So it's from private sector, public sector, international organization, and even civil societies. And embrace uncertainty so that experiment, test, dare to fail, learn from your failures, continuously improve, and then scale and grow. So really mindset is crucial here. So there's a quite inspiring case study from Microsoft. So before Satya joined Microsoft, apparently there was a culture that really stifled innovation, where people were focusing more on pleasing their managers instead of having that creativity or taking calculated risks. So when Nadella came on board, he really tried to infuse that innovation mindset within the culture. So he redesigned the company's mission entirely to empower our people and our organization on the planet to achieve more. So that's the mission statement. So it's very much aligning and communicating that mission internally, but also externally with that growth mindset in mind. Revamping the appraisals process. So instead of being a very KPI or process driven system, it is fostering open communication with the managers and really sharing about career development, about career goals on an individual basis. And then showing by example. Apparently, there's an example where he was asked to provide some advice on for women on asking for a pay raise. And he provided one answer. And then after a few hours, he wasn't happy at all with the answer. So he sent out an internal memo apologizing for his mistake, giving his new answers, and using that opportunity to say, it's actually a learning. I've learned from my mistake. How do I overcome those unconscious bias? And with that humility, he created that kind of leading by example. And then we know it since Satya joined, the share price of Microsoft significantly increased. And then when we talk about the ecosystem, so we talked about collaboration and different stakeholders. So it's very much the key here. So the UN local networks provide a really great starting place for that. So when we talk about ecosystems, so networking, it's putting stakeholders, very diverse stakeholders together in the same room to share the knowledge, share the concerns. No need to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes it's been done elsewhere in other companies, in other countries. How do we learn from each other, and how do we grow together? Learning, so it's learning opportunities, so training, workshops, to get a better understanding of the 10 principles that we shared, but also sharing some of the opportunities and challenges around us and learning from others. Policy dialogue, so it's creating that dialogue between corporations, between organizations, and between local and national governments on incentivizing sustainability, or on also compliance of some of the requirements, of some of the legal requirements that I linked to sustainability. So partnerships, actually 90% of partnerships are made local. So it's enhancing those partnerships within a country, within an industry, within an association or a region as well. And then last but not least, equipping the workforce and everyone with the right tools and resources. So this can range really from translations of some of the resources that we provide, but also to more addressing capacity building and a lot more deeper content focused tools. So I won't go into the detail of this, but this is a perfect example of innovation and collaboration. Actually, it's a CEO-led initiative in Africa from the UN Global Compact in Africa, really putting together some leaders of organizations, some board members, some stakeholders involved in different industry associations and governments to really work towards climate action within the continent. So it gives them the opportunity as well to participate at the COP and in international discussions on setting these ambition targets for the continent, and then members commit to upholding the 10 principles that we've shared and becoming a participant of the UNGC within the 6 months of joining.